Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response, Training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight Protocol, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discussed can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio. Your devices control the audio. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you're using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will try to work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we'll be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory preventing harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar. Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response, Training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight Protocol. Dr. Steve Albrecht is one of the country's leading experts on workplace violence prevention. In 1994, he co-wrote Ticking Bombs, one of the first books on this subject. Since then, he has continued to write, speak, and train on workplace and school violence, the value of threat assessment teams, and safety and security of all employees. His background includes 15 years with the San Diego Police Department. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BS in psychology, and a BA in English. He is board certified in HR, security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 23 books on business, security, and law enforcement subjects. Welcome, Dr. Steve.
Thanks, Deb. And how does my screenshot look? You can see my slides?
I can see your slides. And
Great.
Thanks
to the
Go ahead.
Thanks to the good folks at Heffernan Insurance, and also thanks to the good folks at Aspen Risk Management and Steve Thompson, my colleague from many, many years, and also to Phaedra and also to Deb. And I appreciate your time and attendance today.
Excellent. So we're going to start with some polling questions, right?
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to start with 3 polling questions just to give Dr. Steve an idea of who we have in the room here. So I'm going to launch our first polling question. So my company, agency, or agency has a workplace violence prevention plan. This is either yes, no, or you don't know. And just to encourage everyone to vote, and to participate, I'm going to wait until we have about 70 to 80% of the participants responding. So we only have 3 questions. We're going to ask them right at the beginning here, and that will give Dr. Steve an idea of who his audience is and be a little bit more directed towards what your plans are. So in our first poll, we have 39% say yes, 29% say no, and 31% say they don't know. That's a pretty big percentage that don't know. So I'm going to launch the second question. Okay, here we go. My company or agency has shown some version of the Run, Hide, Fight video to employees as part of a training program or staff meeting. So are you familiar with this from your past experience? Again, either a yes, a no, or an I don't know. And we're getting very quick voting this time, so thank you, everyone. We have 34% say yes, 55% say no, and 11 don't know. So we've got some good share of people that this will be their first experience with this. So that's great. And our last polling question, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Steve after this. Does your company or agency have a threat assessment, emergency response, critical incident, or crisis management team? Again, a simple yes, no, or don't know. And just a reminder, we are recording this and we will be sharing this by URL after the session today. So we have a split vote, 40% yes, 40% no, and 20% don't know. So thank you, Dr. Steve. I look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Deb, and thanks everybody for answering the polling questions. The first one, do you have a workplace violence prevention plan? That's going to be driven typically through your human resources department, and if you have a security department as well, they're working in concert together on that. Most organizations have some type of workplace violence prevention plan, weapons in the workplace, a response to how we address threats that come from outside or inside. Sometimes we look at domestic violence as a policy discussion as well. If you don't have those things, we're behind the curve. If you look at this subject, it's similar to sexual harassment in terms of having a policy, an intervention, an investigative standpoint, and then some decisions as to what to do, whether we need to bring in outside law enforcement or behavioral health, or we can manage the situation in-house. The second question about the Run, Hide, Fight video, we'll talk about a couple versions. There's the standard version, which is done by the Department of Homeland Security. It was filmed right after the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shootings. And that version is widely seen. I think probably 15 million people have seen it. If you type in Run, Hide, Fight, DHS, it'll pop up on YouTube. The version I like, and I'll talk to you about that when we get to that piece, is the Cal State University video. And the California State University system has created an animated version of Run, Hide, Fight, which is really good. And I like it even better than the Homeland Security piece. So we'll talk about that video in just a second. Also, for the threat assessment team, good to hear that we have an organized approach to this. The threat assessment team is typically made up of HR, security if you have that function. It's the leadership team for your organization, whether it's public or private sector. It is risk management, the attorneys that provide legal services to you. It could include the IT department, facilities, risk management, insurance, places like that in the organization, which are the safety and security stakeholders. So we'll talk about the value of those teams in just a second. So thanks for your time and attention. I'll talk quickly, cover a lot of material in a short period of time. The subject of this discussion is a painful one because we continue to see these cases. We just had a shooting today. We hear in Russia that may have claimed some lives at a school, at least 9 people murdered at that one. We've seen incidents in Indianapolis at a FedEx facility involving an ex-employee. We've seen cases in Boulder, Colorado at a grocery store where a police officer was killed. We've seen cases in Atlanta and Colorado Springs. And so it was my hope in starting this material and this subject in my career way back in 1992 that we would be done with this by now, and we are not. And I was, you know, the only good thing you can say about the pandemic in terms of the working from home piece is that we saw a substantial reduction in workplace violence because obviously people weren't in their facilities. But now that people are going back to work, back to their offices, back to their factories, and back to their workplaces, we're seeing a rise in these incidents again. This means to me that we need to continue to talk about policy, about training, and also an awareness piece from your part, which says these perpetrators, whether it's an ex-employee or a current employee or a taxpayer or a customer or a vendor or a stranger, oftentimes will leak information, leak out what they're going to do to somebody else. And here's the interesting part, and this is what the Secret Service taught me so many years ago. They don't tell the target, they tell someone else. They make what's called a third-party threat. They don't tell the target, I'm going to kill you. They tell someone else, I'm going to shoot my boss or I'm going to shoot these people. And we have to have the courage with a capital C to be able to tell the safety and security stakeholders in our organization. If you look at the photo on the title screen here, it is a path, and these people are on a path from ideas to actions. And that is my function and has been my function since 1992, to knock them off the path or to catch them as early as we can on this path from ideas to action. When we talk about this subject, I go back to my work in this area. I have interviewed workplace violence murderers in prison, 3 of them. I wrote the Ticking Bombs book with Michael Mantell back in '94. I've done a book on library security for library professionals and library staff, where we address these same issues. I did a book for Duke University, which was a textbook, Fear and Violence on the Job, and also I've done a book for the American Management Association on crisis management, where we address these same issues. So I've been writing and talking about these subjects for many, many years, and I appreciate our time and attention today. A couple of photographs here. This is Scott DeCry in the center. He killed 8 people at his ex-wife's beauty salon in Seal Beach, California, back in October of 2011. I interviewed him in prison in February of last year, right before the pandemic. And then I also interviewed the guy on the left there, Robert Mack. He killed 2 people at General Dynamics, his boss and the HR manager that handled his termination. I interviewed him in 1993. The book came out in 1994, the Ticking Bombs book. I also re-interviewed Mack 20 years after that in 2013 to ask him what he had learned in prison, and the answer was not much. Both of these guys are still in prison. Scott DeCry will never get out. Perhaps Robert Mack will get out. He is, I think, 68 years old and has a bunch of back injuries, and they may let him out based on his health issues. And then the third person I interviewed was a guy named Larry Hansel. Larry Hansel killed 2 people in San Diego at a company, a manufacturing company called Elgar Corporation. So my biggest conclusion from interviewing these 3 people that did these murders was simply their desire for revenge. So we ask, what is the primary motive for these perpetrators? Ex-employee, current employee, stranger, domestic violence partner, customer, taxpayer, visitor, vendor. It is revenge. You have wronged me in some way and you're going to pay for it. And that is the main motivator that I got from my work in this area for all these years. So this goes back to a really important issue for us, whether we're dealing with taxpayers or customers or visitors or vendors or current employees or ex-employees or soon to be ex-employees. It is how we treat people in our organizations with dignity, with respect, with patience, with empathy at every level in the organization, how we treat people, especially in high risk, high stress discussions, terminations, discipline, turning taxpayers away from situations where they have to pay fines or fees or taxes, things like that. We treat people with respect and empathy and dignity. And our attempt at all times is not to put people in a situation where this revenge piece is what they want to do. If you look at these folks here in the Southwest Airlines flight, this is an emergency situation. There is actually a woman who was injured and killed on this flight, where a piece of shrapnel that blew up from the engine hit her sitting in the, on the window seat over the wing. Everybody's got their masks on, and as you can see, everybody has their masks on incorrectly. Under stress, we go back to how we have been trained. That's why we will talk about the active shooter run, hide, fight response, which is the National Department of Homeland Security protocol for this subject, because under stress, you go back to how you have been trained. If you haven't trained yourself to think about how would I leave my facility safely, quickly, taking as many people as I can with me safely out the door, how would I avoid the bad guy or the bad woman who is doing these shootings? Males and females do these things by hiding out inside the break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace we go to be barricaded away from these attackers, whether it's by a firearm or some other weapon like an edged weapon, something like that. And how do we fight back in a way that stops these attackers? And we've seen this around the country. A group of people who have made the decision to protect themselves and protect other people can stop these attackers at the earliest stages. We'll talk briefly about that. So the run part is important, the hide part is important, the fight part is important. When you think about this subject, how do you look at your own workspace, your own work area, and say, how do I leave successfully and safely? How do I take as many people with me? Where would I go to barricade and to lock down until the police arrive? In the United States, the police response for these cases is typically 8 minutes to 10 minutes. And they have all been trained in the United States on active shooter, and they know exactly what to do. They come in teams, they come in groups ranging from 2 to 6, and they engage with these perpetrators, as we have seen. You want to be as far from that intervention as possible. So a couple things. We go to training like this to change your behavior under stress. I'm having a a conversation with you about an unpleasant subject, but in a pleasant way. You're working in your work environment or you're working from home. We're talking about these things in a way that you can file this away and say, what do I need to do personally to protect myself? What do I need to do personally to protect my coworkers and colleagues? What do I need to do to protect taxpayers, visitors, customers, clients, people that were also in the facility, in the rare possibility that this happens? In life-threatening situations, we've seen people make mistakes that are really kind of odd. They forget how to dial 911. They look for an 11 on their phone. There's no 11. We see people who forget to dial first 9 on their phone when it comes to dialing out to get an outside line. Some people forget to do that. I've seen some phone systems where you have to dial 8 to get an outside line. I would never remember that under stress. I'd have to write it in a big magic marker on my phone because I would not remember to dial 8. So I've seen all kinds of ways where people can set themselves up to get into that frozen position, which is not good for us at all, either fight or flight. You know, fight is protect yourself, flight is get out of there. But the freezing part where you don't know what to do goes back to the idea that under stress, we look at our training. So that's why we're having this conversation for something that may never happen your entire career. I just want you to file away what you know what to know how to do. So when you look at your facility's phone system, is it 911 or 9911? When you dial 911 on your cell phone, who answers? And in my state, I'm in Springfield, Missouri, the Highway Patrol answers, the state police. And when I was in California, and I lived most of my life in California, the Highway Patrol would answer. So you need to say, if I have a choice between cell phone or landline, the best one is landline if I can use that safely and effectively, because that'll get me the PD or fire dispatch that is connected to my geographic location. If you have only your cell phone, you're probably going to get the state police in the highway patrol, that type of thing, and they may have to transfer you over to where you want for the local PD or the local sheriff in your area. And also know that you may be in sheriff's territory or you may be in PD territory. So know which one is which, where your particular office is, where your location is. If you're dialing from your cell phone, again, it may revert to the highway patrol or the state police, and it doesn't matter where you are geographically. Many times I talk to people in stress situations like these and they go, I went to run out the door and it was blocked by the bad guy and I didn't know what to do. I had sort of forgotten the other ways to get out of my own building. And I think about that in my building. I'm in a 21-story building and there's a number of exits. I always come in usually the front door, the back door. There are side exits as well. Sometimes you have to think about how you would leave, how you would get out as quickly as possible, as safely as possible, if your usual entry or exit point was blocked by the police or by the bad guy. And think about, you know, in a multi-story building, if the perpetrator is on the second floor and you're on the third floor, and you stay where you are, or can you go to a higher floor? If the perpetrator is on the second floor and you're on the ground floor, then leave the building. And think about how you might leave the building. If you're on the ground floor, you may have to break a window. And people say, well, do I want to damage the facility? Yes, break the window with a chair, with whatever heavy objects you have, climb out, take as many people as you can, get away safely. And we think about this concept of getting away. The idea is to get as far away as possible. These perpetrators are armed with long guns and assault weapons and things like that. Even a quarter mile could be too close. So I wrote a piece for Police Magazine about 2-3 years ago, and I looked at some things that I have kind of collected over my career about what people think about active shooters. And one of the first ones is they think these perpetrators are unstoppable because they have handguns or multiple magazines or long rifles, things like that. They're not unstoppable. These aren't trained commandos. These are dipsticks that live in their parents' basement that have access to guns. We can stop them. We can fight back. We can flee. We can do lots of things to keep them barricaded out of our rooms when we use the hide part. We've never had a perpetrator shoot through doors to come inside. We've never had a perpetrator impersonate the police. Knowing those two things should also help you about your response as well. Most of these perpetrators know that the minute they pull out their gun, they have 5 to 10 minutes to kill as many people as possible before the police get there. They engage in a firefight with the police, or they shoot themselves before the police get there. They either engage in suicide by cop or suicide, or they fight it out. In these situations, these perpetrators are not there to negotiate. It's not a hostage situation. They're there to kill as many people. You are not usually able to reason with these individuals. The best approach is to flee or to hide out or to fight back. Third point there, they think the police will be able to recognize these perpetrators because they're holding a gun. Sometimes the police don't know what these people look like because the description is vague, and they get there and there's a lot of chaos, as you can imagine. It's a very stressful situation for cops because they realize they could be killed during this encounter. So we really need to give them the best descriptions of what these people are wearing or carrying or going and what they are doing so the police can find them and engage. Now, that goes back to a significant issue for us, which is you may need to give, and this is important, your key card, your key card access to responding law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, cops, because they may not be able to get into your facility if you have key card access. They may not be able to get past the reception area, or they may get locked in a hallway because they don't have key card access. Give your key cards to the cops. Many of these perpetrators have a target list, and they let some people go and they shoot other people. And this is typically bosses, supervisors, HR, senior executives, typically somebody who has broken their heart. And you may have heard the phrase a million times, if I can't have you, nobody else can. Those guys are wicked dangerous because they have broken up with somebody who they've had a sexual relationship with and they're angry about it. Back to this revenge piece. So you may survive because you're not on the target list. You may not survive because you are on the target list, or these people shoot at somebody else and hit us. That's why we want to be out of there, or protected, barricaded, sheltered in place, locked down. Number 5, an alarming number of people believe that lying on the floor and pretending to be dead will save them from being killed. This is not an effective approach. Fight back, get out of there, hide out, barricade as best as you can. Don't lay on the floor. You cannot reason with these perpetrators, and many times they will just walk by and shoot people that are laying on the ground. This is not what we want to do. This is not an effective approach. Many people believe that the shooter will not fire through wooden doors or tinted glass. They have done this in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. The perpetrator fired through the glass entry doors of the school to get inside. Wooden doors and tinted glass do not stop bullets. That is called concealment. It's not called cover. Cover stops bullets. That's concrete walls, brick walls, steel doors, etc. Many people think that the police and the paramedics will be able to save their lives in terms of being shot or having a blood injury. And the answer is not usually, because it takes a long time for the police to clear the building and bring in paramedics. This is why I talk about the value of putting more tourniquets in our first aid kits. Put tourniquets in our AED machines. Put tourniquets by our fire extinguishers. More tourniquets more often. And I'll talk about a program called Stop the Bleed in just a second. Many people in these situations first thought that the sound of gunshots was a car backfiring or firecrackers. Now think, it's May, right, when we're having this conversation. You're not going to see firecrackers in May. The only time you should hear firecrackers at work is on 4th of July, and hopefully you're home having a barbecue with your family, not at work. And cars backfiring has not happened since the 70s. It is not a backfire. If you think it's gunshots, move accordingly to a safe place until you figure out otherwise. Number 9 is important. Cops in responding to these situations are going to come in all kinds of uniforms. You may see green Border Patrol, blue Customs, dark blue law enforcement. You may see green pants and tan shirts worn by sheriff's deputies. You may see undercover cops wearing tactical gear. You may see SWAT officers wearing camo. When you think about these things, there are lots of cops showing up at these. We had an incident in California in San Bernardino at a holiday party where a husband and wife perpetrator killed a bunch of people there. 300 cops showed up at that situation. You will have lots of cops coming. Railroad cops, college police, junior college police, PD, sheriff, highway patrol, tons of cops are coming. Recognize what they're wearing is going to be different than what you might think they may be wearing. Most people don't think about the value of post-traumatic stress debriefings and post-traumatic stress counseling. And the value of these things we saw after the Las Vegas shooting, the Las Vegas attack. I talked to a number of people who were there, and they received lots of supportive care in there from mental health clinicians that helped them get back to a sort of normal after that event. Don't forget, give your first responders as you leave, give them your key cards. So we look at these perpetrators. 2-year National Institute of Justice study came out a couple of years ago, and they looked at workplace violence and school violence shootings, mass shootings with 3 or more perpetrators, or 3 or more victims, or 4 or more victims by one perpetrator. And no shocks here. Look at the things that we see with these people that do these acts. Lots of childhood trauma, lots of crisis events happening in their lives, leading them to be depressed and homicidal or suicidal. They've studied other attackers, and unfortunately, the biggest sort of hero worship for this group is the Columbine attackers. I just sat through a 3-hour FBI presentation Secret Service presentation last month on school shootings, and these Columbine attackers still have websites named after them and whole YouTube videos of people worship these guys. It's ridiculous. And those are the ones they look at to play into, how do I do this so I have more casualties and I can evade the police. And so in some of their tactics, the cops are now studying around the country especially the FBI and the Secret Service, when they look at how we stop these guys. The last one, most of these perpetrators, especially kids, got their guns from home. They stole them from the home of a friend. They had access to the targets because they had the guns they got from the house. So I tell school districts all the time, I tell parents all the time, if you are a gun owner, you must have gun safes and trigger locks. You cannot leave your guns laying around in the hopes that your children or another child won't find them. We found out that does not work. So we look at the NIJ study, and they talked about some solutions to this, and these are obvious as well. Better physical and personnel security, especially in schools and public places. Doesn't mean armed people everywhere, but more physical security. We see lots of cameras and lighting and fencing and things like that have really improved our access control. Gun access restrictions to people that are especially mentally ill and shouldn't be getting their hands on guns. Social controls where we don't have this copycat factor. This is what we call narcissistic homicide, where we ask the media not to cover these perpetrators by name and face, and in some cases they do not, and that helps us with this copycat factor. And then I talked about this awareness of leakage. Leakage is when the perpetrator tells somebody what he or she is going to do. They don't tell the target. The kid that wants to shoot the football coach does not tell the football coach, he tells his friends on the team. Those are the kids that have to have the courage with a capital C, or the employees with a capital C, to report, have the courage to report to the safety and security stakeholders. HR, your boss's boss, department director, risk management, insurance, security if it's a function in your organization, law enforcement, the legal department. Those people are the ones who must step forward when they hear these types of threats that come from a concerned employee like you who says, here's what I've heard and it seems weird and this is uncomfortable, but I want to tell you what's going on. And the last one is we need to do a better job in terms of mental health resources in this country. We already know that. If you look at the homeless issue in this country, and especially in California, we're not doing a good job in terms of street level mental health resources for people who threaten suicide, who threaten homicide. Many times we look at their backstory and we find out they've been involved in mental health crises, which has not been addressed. So a couple themes here. These perpetrators are not here to negotiate. They're here to kill people. We have a very short window of time, 5 to 10 minutes, of when they want to do what they want to do before the police arrive. That's why we need to flee, to run out of the building. The second is hide out, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, and the third one, fight back. The police response, lots of different armed people, tactical equipment, loud radios, the whole 9 yards. It will be quite a chaotic mess. Pay attention to who is a cop in this situation. First aid training, especially connected to tourniquets. There's a program called Stop the Bleed. StopTheBleed.org is based on a 1-hour training program that a number of nurses do around the country. When I was living in Colorado Springs, I had the training in Colorado. It was great. It teaches you how to use a tourniquet on yourself and on other people. It's not a complex thing. It's something that saves people's lives, and we really, really need more tourniquets in our workspaces, in our first aid kits, or in your desk. They cost $10 on Amazon. Get one that has a wide nylon strap that you can tighten down. Those are the ones that work the best, and those are the ones that you can train yourself to use just by looking at the packaging or watching a short video. We want to train people to tell the arriving police and the dispatchers what is going on, direction of travel, what this person's carrying, what they're wearing, etc. Again, tell yourself you can stop these perpetrators. They are not Navy SEALs. I'm not asking you to risk your life. I'm asking you to fight back if that's the only choice you have, if run or hide has not worked for you. So a couple important questions. How do we manage our staff fears and concerns about this? We have training. We also have an awareness when we look at cases that happen around the country where we say, this has happened in a similar business to ours. What do we learn from this situation? How might we help employees or vendors or visitors or customers or clients that have special needs or are disabled? We may need to carry them. We may need to put kids wrapped up in a blanket and grab them and rush them out of the building. Have we discussed the police response? Who's coming? Is it PD or sheriffs in our territory? Is it geographically who's going to arrive? And what other location cops may come? College police nearby, or courthouse cops nearby, or jail cops nearby from the sheriff's department. Have we, and this is an important one, scheduled a yearly, annual, once a year, I don't know how else to say it, yearly, annual, once a year, run hide drill with our staff. We don't have to use fake blood and SWAT teams and all this kind of excitement. We can just simply say once a year, like a fire drill, or where I live, a tornado drill, or where my daughter lives in Florida, a hurricane drill. Can we have a run hide drill that for 15 minutes you leave the building, or for 15 minutes you hide out? just to be able to say to yourself, I've been through this. I know how to do it under a non-stressful situation. They are a little bit stressful in terms of the drill, but it's not like a real situation. But we want to implant that response, run out of the building or hide out of the building. We don't need to do the fight part. That'll happen if there's a rare possibility of an event that we can get out and or lock down. Lastly, this is really for supervisors and managers and leaders to say, what are the mental health resources we have? Do we have an EAP, Employee Assistance Program? Do we have counseling service attached through our medical benefits program? Do we have any kind of relationship, some of you in the public sector, do we have any kind of relationship with mental health, crisis communications, crisis response, county mental health workers who could come into our facility and help our employees? I've done a lot of this post-incident counseling with my clinician colleagues. I'm not a clinician, but I bring those folks in. I'm trained in something called the Mitchell model, which is a trauma model for people involved in these situations. And it is very, very useful to get with people who have been through this type of horrific event and get them back to a stability, normality process by talking about what has happened and saying your response to an abnormal situation was absolutely normal. So the OSHA has given us, OSHA has given us 3 distinct categories and a 4th one, which is sort of a shadow category, which happens a lot but doesn't seem to be as measured as well, of workplace violence perpetrators. First example is crooks, and that's typically robbers. The most common workplace violence incident in the United States is robbery, where someone is injured or killed during a robbery. Second, people we provide services to, taxpayers, customers, students, patients, passengers, etc. If you look at these numbers here, over the span of time, what we're typically seeing most often is students and patients. And patients in healthcare is a volatile combination. We have mentally ill patients, we have drug-seeking patients, we have revenge-seeking patients. And if you talk to people that work in healthcare, one of the most dangerous places on the planet is emergency room on Friday or Saturday night. Now we have armed security in emergency rooms because of those events. Third category, current or former employees. That's the one the news media thinks is the most likely, but that's actually not the most prevalent. And then the last one is one that does not get as reported as much, but I think is much more prevalent, which is domestic violence involving an employee. The more women you have working in your organization, the higher likelihood you have of domestic violence involving an employee. I was a DV detective in San Diego for 6 years. I handled 1,500 cases in that time span. Most domestic violence victims work. One of the best things about California in terms of that subject is we have Senate Bill 400. Senate Bill 400 says if you are a domestic violence victim and an employee, you cannot be fired because you're an employee who has a DV issue. And the second is, it says in the statute, Senate Bill 400, we have to provide a safety plan for the victim at work. That includes moving him or her. We have same-sex sexual orientation or male victims and female victims, right? Moving this person to a safer location, changing their job duties, helping them get a restraining order if that will make the situation better. So when I look at these categories here, the one that concerns me as we come back from a work from home environment is category 4, which is we may have seen a lot of domestic violence, and I've seen this anecdotally from people going from a work from home environment where they're caught in the house, the apartment with their batterer, with their perpetrator. And these are significantly emotionally concerning cases because it says, well, this person has the right to an off-the-job private life, but sometimes their private life, their personal life spills over or crosses over into the workplace, and organizations must respond to these situations when their employees reach out for help. The Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. We have about 2,000 members, and we've been in as an organization since around 94 or 93. I've been involved with them ever since, and we have chapters around the United States, about 15 or 16, and we also have chapters around the world, Asia, Europe, Canada. And we look at this path. This is created by ATAP members here. We look at this path of movement from ideas to actions. That's why my photograph on the front of our conversation was about this pathway. There is a start of a grievance, and it moves to a violent ideation. And at that stage, the person makes a decision to move forward with an attack or not. Here's the good news. Many people have grievances. Many people have violent ideations, and it never goes anywhere. Here's the bad news. For a small number of people, it moves ahead through these other stages that you see here on the screen into the attack. Now, here's the more good news. We can de-escalate people. We can move them off this path from ideas to actions based on how we treat them, based on security procedures, based on security equipment, based on a mental health intervention, based on a law enforcement intervention. People are put in a mental health facility or arrested. especially this is particularly important in domestic violence cases. We can de-escalate based on how we treat people during the discipline or termination process through our human resources processes, right? We can also escalate people based on how we treat them, this desire for revenge, this sense of not paying attention to the warning signs or listening to this leakage that we hear when people make threats not to the target, but to somebody else. And people say, well, I thought he was just kidding, or I didn't think she would do that. And we hear this type of rationalization. So the good news is most people don't get past the violent ideation stage. The bad news is the ones who do move ahead to this attack stage, usually fairly quickly. We look at these people in terms of a psychological autopsy as to what they have done. We see writings and postings and Facebook postings and things that they say to people that lead up to this attack that oftentimes gets discounted or rationalized. If you feel uncomfortable, if you feel intuitively that someone has said something that concerns you, and someone says, you know, I bought a gun this weekend, and you go, oh, really? What for? And they go, well, you'll find out on Monday, right? You go, okay, well, have a nice weekend. You wouldn't say that, right? You'd be concerned enough to say, well, that's unusual. I got to talk to my boss, got to talk to HR. If I have security as a function of my organization, I need to speak to those people right away. The biggest reason people don't report, really two. One is they don't think the person is serious. They think they're, quote, just joking. And the second, and this one's most common, is they feel like this person will know that it was them who reported. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I've never had a case of retaliation involving somebody who reported. Good HR people, good security people, good department heads should not tell the threatener, oh yeah, it was Dave over here who told us. It was Susie who told us what you're going to do. We don't do that. We say, it came to our attention. Why did you say those things? What does it mean in our intervention? So you should have the courage with a capital C to report these things, and your organization should manage this information on a confidential basis if they confront the perpetrator, or the police confront the perpetrator, or a mental health professional confronts the perpetrator. I have done a number of these investigations where I come in and I do a threat assessment on the person who has made these threats, and sometimes I can knock them off the path from ideas to actions. Sometimes it's a mental health intervention that stops this, sometimes it's a police intervention, or both. But we want the opportunity to use threat assessment team procedures, threat management approaches in these situations, so that you know that we are doing the best we can to stop these situations at the earliest level, because we know the warning signs as we see them. So I do a fair amount of media coverage on these things. I try to explain to the media what these things are all about. They typically don't understand it all that well, as you can guess. They tend to focus on the motive, which is not what I care about particularly. The motive may be terrorism, the motive may be irrational religious beliefs, the motives may be suicidal depression, the motive may be broken heart, the motive may be revenge. I can't always fix motive. I can interrupt the opportunity. I can help organizations interrupt the opportunity. Good security, good vigilance, paying attention to leakage and warning signs, that's how we interrupt the opportunity. So the news media is always saying to us, well, why do these people do these things? And it's really the collection of D's that you see on the screen here. They're disconnected from society. They feel disaffected. They don't feel supported. They feel alone, suicidally alone, right? Depressed, driven to act, desperate for revenge, right? Desperate in general, desire for revenge, and then they become dangerous when they have what my clinician colleagues call the broken bridge of self-esteem. The broken bridge of self-esteem says, I don't care about my own life, literally, and I don't care about the lives of anyone else, literally, so I can harm other people and myself, and it doesn't bother me. I don't care. We see early psychopathy in this group earlier than age 18 when it's typically diagnosed. We see the sense of narcissistic entitlement, which is the world revolves around me, especially when I have these guns. We see this commando mentality where they overarm themselves with assault weapons and bandoleros and camouflage and night vision goggles and all that stuff that they get. It doesn't mean if I wear a cowboy hat, doesn't make me a cowboy, right? The last one is really the biggest driver, which is no empathy or regard for self or others, which is that broken bridge of self-esteem. I don't care. And this is a quote from one of them. I want to outdo my idols, and I idolize people that have done these horrific events. I want international attention, which we typically give them. Sorry, I want to be infamous, which means I want to be known for even a bad thing or a horrible thing. You can only kill me once, my actions will live on. And these are the drivers for many of these perpetrators. Again, from my perspective, I don't care about the motive because I can't fix motive. I care about interrupting the opportunity. I care about how we treat people, whether we use empathic treatment, humane discipline in situations involving current or former employees, how we interact with customers and clients and people we provide services to, patients, students, things like that. And I want a hardening of the target from the security piece for the organization. Sorry. Allergy season out here in the Ozarks. So look at this collection of behaviors and see these things in an employee, or in a case scenario where you would think about how much you may know about a client or a customer. I work a lot with libraries in the United States and around the country. I've been to 38 states for libraries, and I have a practice which focuses on keeping library people safe, because they get a lot of people coming into the library that have significant mental health issues and some of the things that we see here. But this is typically what you might see in employees, coworkers. Is this person troubled? Something's bothering them, or are they troubling? They bother other people. Do we see signs of anger, or anger turned inward, which is depression? We look at religious zealotry, whether it's white supremacy groups or terrorism groups or religious zealotry groups. We see people that have this fourth category here, injustice collector, which from my perspective is probably the most concerning, because these people are hypersensitive to being slighted. They misunderstand a lot of social cues. They think the world is against them. They oftentimes arm themselves because they, quote, have to protect myself, unquote, from people trying to steal their job or steal their credit or interfere with their lives. Substance abuse is a concern as well, typically alcohol and stimulant drugs. People who are bullied at work or bullied at school as students are typically more dangerous than the person who is the bully. Significant off-campus or off the job problems with no support, typically divorce and financial problems are number one and number two. Acquired or practice with a firearm is not an issue for me unless this is outside the norm of this person's usual behavior. There are lots of people that own guns in this country. That's not a risk factor for me unless it is outside their normal behavior and they make threatening statements connected to those. Talks about workplace or school violence cases. If it were a good thing, yeah, that guy in Vegas, he took care of business. That was really impressive. Those people frighten me. That's not a normal empathic human response. To hear people talk about school violence or recent workplace violence cases as if the perpetrator did a good thing, that's frightening to me. And when I hear that type of language, I want to report it to our safety and security stakeholders. Again, people who are organized in our organizations around human resources and security and leadership to respond to these things when they come to their attention. So if you hear this leakage, this third-party threat, it's a significant concern. You have to tell somebody about it. And then the last one there, we talked about the path from ideas to actions and that process, but really the last one there is hunter or howler. And this is the model we use in ATAP, which says some people howl. I'm going to get you. You haven't heard the last of me. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to get you. You better watch out. That's howler behavior. Typically, it's loud and provocative and aggressive, and it's designed to scare people and to impact the business in a negative way. It's designed to draw attention to the threatener. The people that concern me the most are the hunters who say, okay, this isn't over yet. And they engage in stealth. They don't warn the target directly, as opposed to the howler who does warn the target directly. Now, howlers can be dangerous, no question, especially if there was previous sexual intimacy between the victim and the suspect. If I can't have you, nobody else can. Those guys are wicked dangerous. But I'm significantly concerned when I see this hunter behavior, which is, here are the things that we hear that are opposite of the howler, which is this person that has a plan or they engage in stealth, or we don't know where they are in terms of they fell off the radar, but we see or hear gossip or outside information that bad things may be happening based on their behavior, but they don't threaten the target. That's what the Secret Service taught me so many years ago, which is stop looking at verbal threats as the only risk factor. It's not. There are others, including this leakage. So let's talk about the video. Run, Hide, Fight, seen by 50 million people on YouTube, filmed as a joint project with the Department of Homeland Security in the city of Houston, Texas. They've actually copyrighted Run, Hide, Fight. It's been used kind of in a way like Kleenex or Popsicle or Xerox copies. I mean, everybody knows what the concept is. If you have not seen the video, I recommend it. I think it's useful to watch as a staff, to watch in a staff meeting. It's about 8 minutes long. If you drag the cursor the first 90 seconds on YouTube forward, you can skip the guy that looks like Vin Diesel with the shotgun shooting people. It's not bloody, but it's a little disturbing. If they use blanks and he wanders around shooting people, it's a little disturbing. Sometimes with groups, I may skip that first 90 seconds and just play the rest of the video. If I had my choice, I would use the Cal State University video, which I like quite a lot. It's an animated cartoon. It's very well done. I think it resonates with employees that are younger, especially Generation Z. It resonates with college students. If you have kids in your home, 15, 16, 14, 15, 16 and above, you could show the video to them and say, this is what we do when we go to church or we go to the mall or we go to a restaurant. It's that critical to our personal lives as well. The run, hide, fight concept is well described in both videos, but I think the Cal State University one is the best. So we talked about, look at the bottom there, the 15-minute drill. If you're in a leadership position and you're hearing the sound of my voice, please try to figure out a way to do a once-a-year run, hide training where we simply mimic what we're talking about here, leave the building for 15 minutes, come back, pick up your pens, go back to your keyboards, get back to work, or hide out in some place inside our organization, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, place where we can barricade and lock the doors and keep the bad guy out for 15 minutes. It proves that we know how to do the drill under stress. Cover stops bullets, steel doors, concrete walls, brick walls. Concealment hides you. Concealment is tinted windows, frosted glass, wooden doors. It doesn't stop bullets. Again, we want to get behind cover if at all possible. And maybe the smartest thing to do in terms of cover is to get in your car and drive away. If you can, take as many people with you that you can cram in the car and get out before the police get there and before the bad guy comes across us in the run, hide, fight environment. In terms of the fight piece, we're talking about improvised weapons. Could be things that are sharp or heavy, books that are really heavy. A fire extinguisher is probably the most common. Things that we can use to knock these people down and to tackle them. We've seen a number of examples around the country where teachers, football coaches, other people have had the courage to do these things. When I look at my own life and having been a first responder, and I will never surrender to these people ever. I'm going to fight back with whatever I have. And when I look at our perspective as a country, the way that we stop these perpetrators is to say that you aren't going to win. You're not going to kill everybody in this organization. We're going to stop you before the police get here or once the police get there. So this is UCLA. They had an active shooter situation where a professor was killed by an engineering student. You can see that the students wrapped some cable around the top of the door closer for the classroom to keep this person from pulling open the door, and then they barricaded the door. If you look at the next photograph here, which is at Ohio State, they had an armed attacker in the parking lot. No perpetrator is going to push through all these chairs and come inside. If he does, and we have the lights off, this person is disoriented, we tackle him as soon as he comes inside the building. We don't let him come in and start just shooting everybody in sight. So if you look at this design here and the previous one, these perpetrators do not have time or the intention to push past all these barricades to come inside. They will simply move on to another room. If we can barricade and keep them out until the police arrive, we're going to survive the incident. So I look at the people I've talked to that have been involved in active shooters over the last almost 30 years. What I typically hear is, I thought it was firecrackers, I thought it was a car backfiring, and the last one is, I can't believe this is happening. And these are all big barges floating down that river in Egypt known as denial. I don't expect you to be paranoid, I expect you to be empowered. I don't expect you to be like me, a paid paranoid. I'm paid to worry about these things and to obsess over this stuff. But I do want you to say, if my intuition says that sounds like gunshots, don't say it must be firecrackers in May. And when you look at these situations, lots of people rationalize the irrational behavior of these perpetrators by saying this couldn't possibly be happening here. This is a real estate office. These guys don't do that there. Well, they do it everywhere. Hospitals, factories, offices, private sector businesses, public sector businesses, we've seen it all. Be prepared for the possibility that this may happen. It probably won't. The numbers are on our side in terms of the rarity of these events, but you can see every day in this country, we see every couple of weeks a mass attack somewhere. It's disturbing to me that these things are still continuing. As a result, we've got to have a training plan and a response that's both agency-wide, organization-wide, and for you yourself personally. So we think about the run, hide, fight piece. It's to educate people, to look at an outside-the-box solution, to think about where you would go to evacuate. We don't want people, if you look at the bottom there, to freeze or panic. We want you to think and act. If you have a workplace violence policy, give it a quick read. If you're a supervisor, a leader, a manager, a business owner, a business operator, look at the language that you have and make sure that it addresses things like domestic violence in the workplace, who say, you know, if you have a DV issue, and you can come to us with confidence that we're going to be confidential, but we're also going to help you with a difficult situation, protect yourself while you are here at work. We look at the safe room concept. We look at code words, paging notifications like we do at hospitals. We have code blue, code black, code silver, code red, lots of things that are code words that are put out in hospitals. You can use the same type of response. If you have a paging system for a large facility, you know, code silver, code gray, code black might mean somebody with a weapon in the particular location that you had. I use code words. I talk about this in my training classes all the time for individual employees. Go get Dr. Green means go call the sheriff, right? They wear green pants, right? Call Arnold, as in Schwarzenegger. Call Dr. Arnold or Dr. Armstrong. It means go to a safe place and call the police. Think of that middle piece there, fire alarm response. We have seen in the shooting in Florida at the high school where the perpetrator pulled the fire alarm when they'd actually had a fire drill that morning, and he pulled it right at the end of the day. Stoneman Douglas High School. The fire response may be pulled by the perpetrator. It's rare that they do this, but they've done it. You may recall they interviewed a guy named Larry Hansel. Larry Hansel pulled the fire alarm in San Diego at Elgar Corporation when people rushed out of the building. He also set off some smoke bombs, which he brought with him. He shot and killed two of the people there in the chaos. If it's me and there is a fire alarm while I am safely locked down in a safe barricaded room where the perpetrator can't get in, and I hear the fire alarm, if I don't smell smoke and I don't see heat and flames, things like that, I'm not leaving. Some of these perpetrators have done these things. So if you are obvious that it's a fire, then you're going to have to evacuate. But if not, stay where you are. It's useful to stay inside until you can verify that it actually is a real fire. But most of these perpetrators in these situations pull the fire alarm to evacuate people into their fatal funnel where they shoot them. I guess the parallel you could use is if you've ever traveled and been sleeping in a hotel and the bloody fire alarm went off at 2 o'clock in the morning, your first thought is, okay, now what do I do? Get up and get dressed and get ready to leave. But then wait and see what the management says, wait and see what you can see outside, what you can see in the hallways, things like that. So don't just say the fire alarm means I have to evacuate. You may need to stay in the evacuation location, the barricade location, for a few minutes until the police response or several hours. There was a case in Washington, D.C. at the Navy Yard. Navy contractor came on to the facility with a shotgun. The police chased him for 67 minutes before he was killed. So you may need to lock down for a substantial amount of time. So the police response is going to be aggressive. It's going to be immediate. It's going to be loud. They won't know who you are, and they're not going to help you evacuate. They're not going to help you with first aid because they're looking for the perpetrator. Get out of their way. Take care of each other. If you have to carry people out of the evacuation stage, move them from the hot zone outside to get treatment, do that. So in terms of locking down, we want to stay away from the doorway, the fatal funnel, as we say. We want to have the police response be as organized as possible. Again, give them your key cards so they can get into locations. Some things that it may happen as well. We have something called a Knox box, K-N-O-X. A Knox box is a facility storage box that's typically posted outside the building, usually 6 or 7 feet off the ground, that the fire department can get into. They have Knox box keys on their rig. They can open up these Knox boxes and get key cards and also building plans, or also hard keys, and if they need to go through the facility, and they can share that with law enforcement. Last couple things. If we look at the fact that some of these perpetrators are current employees or ex-employees, we don't designate safe rooms. This is the place we all go to. We say, go wherever you need to go. We don't set up designated safe rooms because the perpetrator may know what these rooms are. Second, we don't stage anymore. We used to, when we were kids, right? We used to stage outside for fire drills and things like that. We don't do that. For active shooter situations, we flee. We don't stage in the parking lot. We don't go stand by the flagpole. We get out. And again, up to a quarter mile could be too close. So make sure you get away as far as possible. Look for this concept of targeted violence, that these people make threats that are leakage, that don't necessarily are aimed specifically at the person they're talking to, but they may tell other people. They may leak to a third party, which could be you. You have to have the courage to talk about this. Know the difference between cover, stops bullets, concealment, just hides you. In a perfect world, you'd have cover and concealment. So look at the safe rooms here. Left-hand side, good examples. Right-hand side, not so good. I've seen safe rooms that have no doors. That's not really a safe room. I've seen safe rooms that we can't lock. Again, barricade as best as you can. In a perfect world, it would have flashlight and water and first aid supplies and things like that, and even a hardline phone. When we look at the left-hand side, perfect world, right-hand side, not so good. Do the best you can. One of the most difficult challenges I have from a security consulting perspective is when I work with healthcare. We don't lock patient rooms. We don't lock exam rooms. And so it's difficult sometimes to barricade in those situations with the healthcare staff if the perpetrator is a patient, because we don't lock those rooms. We have to do the best we can with what we have in the room to be able to barricade the doors. Last couple things, and I'll turn it over for any questions. These events are rare and catastrophic. Most of these perpetrators are male lone wolf actors. When I hear the police are searching for more than one perpetrator, it's extremely rare. It's usually one person. I've known 5 cases in 30 years that it's been 2 or more people, and that's typically Columbine is one, the Oklahoma City bombing, the marathon bombers, those types of things. That's usually more of a terrorist type of approach with multiple perpetrators. No perpetrators ever shot through the door, and no perpetrators ever pretended to be the police. Doesn't mean they won't, but that's not something we typically pay attention to right away. We look at this third-party leakage. We can't predict violence. We can't predict what people are going to do, but we can assess dangerous, we can assess intuitive behaviors that a reasonable person would say that seems to me to be wrong or makes me uncomfortable. I've got to tell somebody, especially if I hear this third-party leakage. This person says, I'm going to kill my boss, and they tell you, not the boss. Again, that is hunter behavior as opposed to howler behavior. Employee management vigilance, training just like this. Drills, in my perfect world, we do a once-a-year drill. Partnerships with our security stakeholders, which is a threat assessment team process, HR, security if it's a function, law enforcement, risk management, legal, the people that are the safety and security stakeholders. So last thing here, take a look at the Run, Hide, Fight video. Is either the DHS one or the Cal State University one as appropriate. Consider showing it at your house, age appropriate. Make sure everybody knows how to dial 911 and what to say to the dispatchers, and remind people that their cell phones may not be the first best choice. If they have access to a landline, use that first, and then the cell phone, because it'll typically ring to the state police or the highway patrol. Remind staff to be intuitive, to not stage and go someplace where you're expected to be. Train yourselves to get a description of the perpetrator if you see him or her. Use our clinical resources later when this event is over, employee assistance program, mental health clinicians, to get your PTSD issues addressed so it doesn't become a concern for the rest of your life. Doesn't mean you won't forget, just means that we can manage these things with proper behavioral support and clinical help. And if you have an organization where you're in contact with law enforcement agencies, you may want to get a site security survey from them. You may want to get some additional training from them, especially for the Run, Hide, Fight part we've been talking about. And then think about as best as you can, if you're especially in a leadership position, be able to schedule a 15-minute once-a-year drill just for the run part and the hide part. And on that happy note, I wanted to show you a picture of all my dogs. So you can see that I have a few, and there's probably one or two dogs that are not even in this picture. And I talk about a complex, painful, difficult subject like this. Once in a while, I just like to look at my dogs. Deb, back over to you for any questions.
Thank you, Steve. That's a great presentation. We do have some comments thanking you for a fantastic presentation. So, and then we have a couple of questions that came in. So with the most recent active shooter at their current employment, what was the true root cause to their action? Was it being mistreated, bullied, not being treated professionally at work? Do you have any clues into that insight?
There's one in, if they're talking about the FedEx shooting that happened in Indianapolis, I don't know the motive of that one. If I go back to my own research and my own discussion with these perpetrators, it's typically revenge, and we can treat them really well and they still feel this way. But you know, it could be bullying, it could be revenge. There's lots of things that motivate these people to do these things. They need an excuse, and they'll typically find one. Okay.
And then the only other comment that we had was from someone that knows you from your past. So I'll send that message on to you privately later on. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And thank you, Dr. Steve Albrecht, for your time and expertise today.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks for everybody at Heffernan and for Aspen.
Sure thing. We hope all of the attendees found today's material to be a valuable use of your time. And be sure to join us on June 1st for stress management, real tools for work and life balance. Thank you, everyone, and have a safe day.